just the different, I was trying to group these into categories like maybe utility, incentive to buy, disincentive to sell, incentive to lock up for one coin to get another, a lot of the DEX stuff and stuff like that too. Are there different pieces that feel more like, I guess less risky versus more risky? And there's a whole bunch of, that's why I'm trying to like break this down into, there's like 5 different ways we can go with this. Okay. Like depending on, like you mentioned too, about how much you have to put in it, how much you're willing to risk, what your time horizon is. Are you able to get enough out of it in your time horizon that makes it worth it to even do it? But I guess over those few things, like maybe you could compare it to like Iosa, Hedron, that type of ecosystem with like the PH ecosystem. Maybe that would be like a useful comparison to be like, okay, what are you actually doing when you participate in this? And how does that, what does the difference look like?
Yeah. So yeah, the two are obviously very different. The yield in Hedron and Iosa are inflationary in nature, where if you have hex stakes, you mint Hedron, you stake your Hedron Iosa, you're earning Iosa, which is inflationary based on the amount of Hedron being burned. And so that is actually lower on the risk curve than like some of the PH stuff, because the only thing you're exposed to at that point is market volatility and I guess locking your coins up too, right? And so like kind of the baseline risk we all take by being in crypto is market volatility, which is a considerable risk. But if it's the same risk across every single strategy or every single type of position, then like that risk doesn't matter when you're comparing risk across assets. Right. So it's like we're exposed to the price of Hedron and Iosa, which has been a bad thing lately because those coins have not done very well in all of this since PulseChain has launched. But the risk in terms of how to obtain the yield is very low because they're single-sided staking positions. So you're just staking the coins, or you're literally putting up stake in the system saying, I'm not going to sell my coins. So the system rewards you with tokens because of that. And what the bet for Hedron and Iosa is also the same as Hex, which is T-share exposure. So these are just the value of Hedron and Iosa is derived from the T-share, which means that when you own these tokens, you have exposure to the T-share, except it's just more downstream exposure. Hex is having a T-share is the most direct exposure you can have to a T-share. Liquid Hex is the next because you can exchange Hex directly for T-shares. Then it's Hedron because you can theoretically exchange Hedron for T-shares itself on the liquidation market, and its distribution model is based on the T-share. And then Iosa is another level abstracted from there because it only comes into existence when T-shares are gone through the liquidation auction or Hedron is burned. So they both are tied to the T-share. It's just the level of difference. The distance that they have to that core value prop of the T-share is different. So Hedron is closer to that value. Iosa is further away from that value. So Hedron is a less risky bet than Iosa is from that perspective.
What is Hedron and Iosa? What are the incentives? Like what are I guess what are they trying to get you to do?
I guess hold the token, participate in the protocol. Help you get cheaper T-shares theoretically through the liquidation auctions. That's pretty much it. They're tickers and coins that a community can form around, and really what they do, in my opinion, is allow people to get more exposure to T-shares than they could get directly through Hex, because 1.2 billion Hedron, which is about a squid position, it's about like $300, maybe $200. Versus a squid position in Hex, which is probably a couple $1,000s still at this point. And so it allows people to get that T-share exposure that they weren't able to get because they're not as early to Hex, or they don't want to lock up their coins for as long. It allows them to get that today, just in a more abstracted form.
And what does it incentivize to win in Hedron Iosa ecosystem? What are the plays that are most rewarding for them?
So right now, actually staking in this Alex Hedron Maxi pool is pretty rewarding because it's paying a 50% APR, which is higher than the native staking. So if you have some Hedron and you want to chuck it in here, you can de-risk your position a little bit because it sells some of it into Hex. But also you can earn more APR by holding those tokens than by staking it natively. And then the incentives for staking it natively is keeping 100% asset exposure while compounding your coins slowly over time.
Yeah, I was just trying to get in the mind of, especially when Alex is making this stuff. I mean, there's a ton of just really complex pieces that fit together to actually make it work. And, we got V2 coming at some point as well. And I'm just always wondering, like, this type of game, that when people choose to play it, the difference between that versus all the, you mentioned meme coins before, we're going to talk about, the PH ecosystem in a second, but it's just the ability to see the similarities and differences and be like, okay, this is going to be more profitable for me in my personal situation, the amount of coins I want to give up, the amount of risk I want to take on, the time horizon I want to sit through this, the cycles and all this stuff, versus not. So that's why I'm trying to get into the description of these so much. But yeah, you're killing it on that. And then PH.
Real quick, Iron Freedom, his question, he's asked if I'm so bullish on Hedron and Iosa. And I think that's a good point to bring up. I am still bullish on it long term, but we're going to have to see Hex and Pulse and all of that do well first. So my personal thesis and speculation is that Hex needs to do well, establish a higher price point, get into its own bull run. And then once that starts to happen and T-shares again become unobtainable to the average retail market participant, then that's when they're going to start looking to things like Hedron and Iosa to get that T-share exposure, because you just can't get that with Hex anymore. So Hedron will just like skyrocket once we start to get those bull market money back in the system, because the fundamentals are so strong. But right now, like if its value is derived from the T-share and Hex is just in the shitter, like it's only natural that these things are going to outperform to the downside because they're more abstracted away from the thing that's lost value. So
is that the way to understand it? To understand it as when Hex does well, these should do well because they're so tied to Hex, and the disconnect maybe is like they're a different coin, different ticker, different, some different game theory around them, but Is it just because, maybe Hedron, it's a new coin, it was a new coin, and, kind of reset in a lot of ways, new players, new wells and stuff like that. So people think, oh, maybe it can go higher in certain ways, or get more multiples in different cycle conditions. Is that the disconnect between treating them differently just because they are a different token technically?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, like I said before, you can get a squid position in Hedron for a couple $100, and in Hex you need a couple $1,000. So like it just attracts a different level of user, and you can still get yield in it, just like you can still get trustless yield with Hedron and Iosa like you can with Hex. But they're different tickers, and even though their value is derived from the same thing, their value proposition is different.
So the answer is like, oh, why is Hedron and Iosa down so much? Is Hex up right now?
Yeah, because Hex is down. And like when Hedron did all of its runs back when it was like 7-8 cents, more or less, a lot of that was just due to like probably boredom in the market, excitement over this new thing that we're getting. That's pretty cool, in my opinion. But it wasn't because Hex was going up. It wasn't because Hex was going up. It was more based on speculation around the asset, and it did great. It did a 30x run from its first bottom to its second local top. Didn't make an all-time high, but we haven't seen Hedron and Iosa exist in a Hex bull market yet. So we still have a lot to see for how this asset can perform over time.
Sure. Yeah, you want to talk about the PHUX and the different incentives and the different things that affect those?
Yeah. So actually the incentives for the PH coins, PHUX, Fame, and Fiat, they're much more easy. They're much more tangible than like Hex, Hedron, and Iosa, because they're tied to revenue. They're tied to an income stream. So all three of these tokens you can stake and then earn a percentage of the fees generated by the platform. So for PHUX, like you have up, you provide it in the Prime Fux liquidity pool, which is 80% PHUX, 20% Pulse, and then you stake that for VE Fux. And then when you do that, I believe with 50% of the platform fees goes to that staking pool. So, these assets are tied to real world incomes, real revenue streams. In Fiat, it gets, I believe, 50% of the fees on the platform. And then Fame gets 40% of the fees of the platform. So by holding these tokens, not only are they non-inflationary, they have a fixed supply. So there's a digital scarcity kind of thing. But think of them like dividend paying stocks, essentially, where by owning them, go ahead.
No, just on that. So you mentioned they're backed by things. Is that different than, like, for example, Hedron, Iosa, where tokens came into existence? Yeah, they're backed by, I guess, T-shares, but can you sort of break that down to the difference between the ones that when you talk about it like that?
Yeah, so the PH tokens are backed by real revenue generated by activity on the platform. So the fees are coming from people utilizing something and paying to utilize it, and then you are getting a percentage of those fees. So like a dividend paying stock is the most obvious metaphor or analogy you can make to traditional finance assets. And that's very different than Hex and Hedron and Iosa yield, because those are coming from inflation. So the inflation of those tokens technically is diluting their price because there are more coins with the same amount of liquidity backing it. So like the amount of money backing each token goes down as the inflation goes up. So the bet for that and what it's being backed by is betting that more people over time are going to come in and support the ecosystem or want to get a percentage of that inflation over time. That's essentially how like the price of, well, that's how the price of any asset goes up. People coming in and buying it and that people not selling it. But the revenue, the yield where it's coming from is very different. One is inflation. One is hard revenue generated by a platform. And for most people, people are able to wrap their head around the value of something like the PH tokens because it's producing a revenue that's more similar, more tangible to people coming from the TradFi world versus Hex, where it's like you have to be convinced essentially of a digital scarcity narrative of the T-share because they're deflationary. And so if you want to get a piece of that inflation going forward into the future, you need to speculate on it now. Because the ability to get that inflation gets harder and harder over time, which is also true for Hedron and Iosa. So the bet on that is like, I'm going to get a percentage of the inflation, and I am speculating that people in the future will also want to get that inflation in the futures, but it's going to be harder for them to do so. So they're going to theoretically pay more for it. That's kind of the bet there. It is, and it's like with all of crypto, it's a greater fool theory. You know, where I'm betting that somebody in the future is going to pay more for this than I'm paying for it now.
Well, something Dylan said the other day on your all stream too that struck me. It was kind of like the fees when you have a platform where the money is kind of like going around, and the winners get part of it, the losers lose part of it, and it's kind of this like that's kind of like what it's backed by, right? Like the people putting money into the platform versus the inflation, the digital scarcity, that their narrative of earning more over time. You still got to believe everything's going to work and not have bugs and rug pull and all this stuff. But it's just a different way of doing it, like you said, in inflation and other tokenomics like that. Versus there's there's an ecosystem that people have money trading back and forth on it.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. Yeah, I hope everyone listening to. I hope this is helpful to sort of wrap your head around how these things actually work and why it would be useful to participate or not. And because that's the thing, there's so many products, and we've just got started. PulseChain's 4 months old. Zoom out, year or two from now, it's gonna be like, oh, all this stuff happened. We don't remember what happened. Don't even know what's going on. New people come in and see all this stuff too. But there will be more products. There will be more stuff. There's Liquid Loans hasn't launched yet. There's Power City. There's a whole bunch of stuff. Tetra, stuff that hasn't even launched yet, that hasn't even came out for us to even see how it works on these type of platforms. But the whole maybe you can compare that too real quick before we wrap up. Like Liquid Loans versus PH ecosystem. How's the narrative like that?
Yeah, so the Liquid Loans narrative is completely different than the PH protocols. The one that's most closely related to is fiat, but instead of peer-to-peer collateralized loans, it's a stablecoin factory. So you collateralize your Pulse, which you can also do on fiat, but instead of taking out any coin that you want that is offered by the protocol, you can mint USDL, which is a coin that is always redeemable for $1 worth of Pulse, which would make it theoretically $1 because if it's more or less, then an arbitrage opportunity exists to set it back at $1. So you can only borrow one thing. You can only take out loans in one thing. The loan terms are different. So it's no payment periods and 0% APY. So actually doing loans in USDL from one perspective is more profitable than doing loans on fiat because the APY that you're paying on the loan is 0. So any kind of yielding opportunity is in profit automatically because anything that's bigger than 0 is making you a profit. There are still risks associated with it, and the main risk is the volatility of Pulse. Volatility of Pulse and volatility of the coins that you're buying with the USDL to provide liquidity with. right? So if you take $1,000 loan and you took $1,000 and you buy some coins and you're getting 20% APY, that sounds APR, that sounds pretty great. But if the coins go down by 50%, well, now you owe $1,000, you only have $500 worth of coins, and that 20% instead of earning on the $1,000 is now earning on $500. So the rate at which that loan can be repaid greatly diminishes into a point where you might not even be profitable for a long time. And that is a long position technically. So you're borrowing stables, buying an asset. So if the assets went up in price, you take $1,000 loan, swap 1,000 USDL into a coin at 2x's. Now you have $2,000 worth of coins, $1,000 loan, and the 20% is being earned on 2,000 instead of 1,000. So you're paying off that loan even faster.